the Lights, Camera, Austin interview. Joining me now on Lights, Camera, Austin to discuss his new documentary, Run Like the Devil, is director Steve Mims. Steve, thank you very much for joining me today to discuss Run Like the Devil. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, and thank you for having me.
Well, thank you very much, Steve, for coming in to discuss Run Like the Devil. This is a U.S. Senate race that's impossible not to get caught up in. So was that the appeal to you when you decided that you want to make a documentary about this race between incumbent Ted Cruz and challenger Beto O'Rourke?
Well, I was interested when I read that Beto was going to run. And the reason I was interested is I had watched the campaign in 2012 between Ted Cruz and the Democratic nominee, Paul Sadler. Mm-hmm. And at that time, it was not really considered a race, and it turned out not to be a race. It's like it was a blowout. And I felt that, I read a lot of news, but I felt that I didn't have enough information about either candidate. And I had filmed Ted Cruz a couple of years earlier in 2010 at a Tea Party rally, so that was my first exposure to him. And so back to reading about Beto starting, I thought, this is going to be interesting because he started so early. He announced his campaign March the 31st of 2017, mm-hmm. and nobody had done that. And so I thought, this might be a real real race. And I went out and filmed that, and then filmed it incrementally up until August the 2nd this year.
And was the plan always to complete the documentary months in advance of the election, so it would be out there as a sort of a way for people who may not be following the Senate race to sort of familiarize themselves with what's going on?
Yes, we always wanted to have a version of the film that came out before the election. For the reason I stated, it's like to be able to give people a moment where they could sit down and get to know both of them and then think about how we arrived at this point and put that in the context of what we're living through right now politically, because it's a very important election.
And do you intend to update the documentary after the election's held to reflect who won and the consequences of that?
I'm sure we will, yeah. The film is 59 minutes. I'm sure we'll do an addendum to it after it's all over.
So, Steve, for you, what is the significance of this U.S. Senate, both Texas and the nation? Do you think of this as a referendum on the Trump administration? Or do you possibly look at it as signaling that Texas might be turning back into a blue state after several decades?
I think that it's hard to extrapolate about that and be confident about what you're saying, but I do think that this particular race was not predicted to be a real race. And you can listen to people who've been commentating on this from the beginning, and that story is now changing. It's changing because of two things, I think. Because of the labor of Beto O'Rourke. I mean, you can't deny the guy has really worked himself into the ground to get to where he is. And then it's compounded by what's happening with the Trump administration. There's no way to... Those things are interwoven, and they have been since the beginning. So I think that's why we are where we are.
Beto O'Rourke is in a statistical tie with Ted Cruz. How much of Beto O'Rourke's support has to do with who he is and how he has campaigned, as opposed to perhaps anger towards Ted Cruz's willingness to support the Trump administration, especially after what Ted Cruz endured during his ill-fated presidential run back in 2016?
Well, I think in both cases, in terms of Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz, they have, in a way, by their own actions, put themselves in this position. And I think that Beto, it's interesting because they're both about the same age, almost within 3 years. They both have Ivy League degrees. They both have dads. This is all in the movie, but they both have fathers who are very influential to them. And yet they turned into, in the same state, being raised parallel to each other, they're totally different people with different ideas of what government's supposed to be and how democracy, I won't say democracy, but basically how you get things done in a way that fits with their philosophies. And to me, that's the most fascinating thing about it. And then, I don't know if this signals the beginning of anything in terms of Texas, turning blue. You just can't. It's hard to say about that. But I think that it's definitely an indicator that people are open to an alternative to what they've had.
Steve, early in your documentary, Run Like the Devil, Ted Cruz tells you, or he talks directly to the camera, and he says, "It wouldn't surprise me if this movie paints Beto O'Rourke," added quotes there, "as a liberal hero challenging great oppression, great oppressive. That narrative would be a very natural narrative for this movie." Is there a specific reason why kind of Ted Cruz would say that to you?
I was laughing out loud at the time the interview happened when he said that, because I just thought it was very funny. And I understand that. Like, look, I live in Austin, Texas, and I teach at the university, and there's no way somebody from the outside would not go I wonder what that guy's politics are. And so they had done their due diligence about me, and they were very generous to give us the time for the interview. So we're lucky to get it. And he actually gave us more time. We asked for 30 minutes. They said you can have 20. He stayed for 40 minutes, and I know he was late for his next event. So he was intent on, honestly trying to lay out his case for his background and what he believes. And but yeah, the fact that he came out with that was just, it was amusing. But I understand it. Like, that speaks to, I think, the way a lot of people would come to a movie like this. They're very suspect of it. And so we've been aware of that since the beginning. And so our whole objective in making the film is to really sidestep that to the degree that we could play it right down the middle and let the facts speak for themselves. That's what we really tried to do. Because if it was a propaganda film, that has no value to anybody. And you can't make a film, and although people probably do this anyway, but you can't make a film where people can trash it because of some cheap shot or some illegitimate thing. And so we really went out of our way to try to avoid the obvious things that are out there. And there's a lot of material out there. And we just left it out.
And bearing in that mind, it is a film that plays it straight down the middle, because you devote as much time to Ted Cruz, his upbringing, and his previous Senate race as you do to Beto O'Rourke, his upbringing and his current campaign as well. So for you, what did you have to do in order to get those sit-down interviews with Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke? Sort of what screening process did you have to go through?
Well, it was a series of phone calls and emails from the producer, Rochelle Fothery, or from me, to get there and to basically arrange the time to do it. That's the hardest thing. Like, we didn't have a lot of pushback in terms of, we're definitely not going to do it. The difficulty was finding a window of time to be able to do it. So we ultimately had two interviews with Beto, one that was about 40 minutes, one that was about 20. And we had the one interview with Ted, which was at they were really busy. I mean, it was tough for them. The only window they had was at a Mexican restaurant. So we're doing an interview in a restaurant at like 5 o'clock, happy hour in Houston. And when you see the interview, it's luckily it's mixed out pretty well, but like there's a little bit of stuff behind him. But that was the only, and that was not anybody's, there's no conspiracy about that. That's just the only time that we could do it.
If you're just joining Lights Camera Austin here on KOP 91.7 FM and streaming live at KOP.org, my guest today is Run Like the Devil director Steve Mims. The documentary will screen at 7 p.m. tonight and 6:30 p.m. tomorrow at the Austin Film Society's AFS Cinema with director Steve Mims in attendance. And the film will also screen September 8th, 9th, and 11th at the AFS Cinema. Steve, politics aside for you, and you kind of already sort of touched upon this in brief, but what do you personally see as the differences and similarities between Cruz and O'Rourke? And as the documentary emphasizes, both have this very strong relationship with their father, right. And there's sort of, in a way, it almost seemed natural or that they would enter politics, especially in the case of Ted Cruz, who was very much groomed in that way. Beto O'Rourke has entered this current U.S. Senate race as an underdog, and that was Ted Cruz's status when he ran in 2012.
I think that they're very similar in that. But their family life is totally different. So Ted Cruz, his father is an evangelical preacher, and was involved with helping elect Ronald Reagan. And so from the earliest days, and he's also, he immigrated from Cuba as a student at UT Austin. So there's a history with the revolution. And so his father has very strong views about free market economics and about communism and whatever. And so Ted came up from the time he was very little with a full dose of that. And actually his dad literally says that in the film, like, of a conservative Christian worldview of everything. And so, on the other hand, Beto's father was a county judge in El Paso who died in 2001 in a bike accident. And he was very beloved in the city there, and was a Democrat until at one point he changed over and became a Republican for one election that he ran for in El Paso. But what you have on display are two different philosophies about the role of government, what you do if you're an elected official, and how you work with the people that you're representing. So that's one of the most instructive things about the film, is to really get an idea about that.
And in the documentary, Run Like the Devil, political advisor Mark McKinnon says Democrats have been aching for a charismatic leader to run statewide. They are looking for the next Ann Richards. People sort of thought that they may have had that in Wendy Davis when she ran for governor. Why is it taking so long to find a Beto O'Rourke?
There are not many Beto O'Rourkes. There are not many Ann Richards. There are not. It's like a good quarterback in the NFL. There are not many of them either. There are a lot of passable ones, but you don't find people that talented that often.
He is very charismatic. He's captured not just the imagination of people here in Texas, but also on a national level. He was just recently on the Ellen DeGeneres show. But Ted Cruz is the incumbent. And even though he's in a statistical tie, do you think that Ted Cruz has an advantage over Beto O'Rourke when it comes to winning this election?
I really don't know. Like, I think that was the assumption up until like the last polling that came out, and it is a very conservative state. Like, we traveled all over filming, and it's very rural, and people, there's a situation in Texas where in some parts of Texas you have to vote in a Republican primary because there are no Democrats running. So there are a lot of people who are programmed to vote Republican because if they know three people in their town who are running for a job and they're all Republicans, they're going to vote in that primary because they got to pick one of them. And so that's the reality on the ground out in rural Texas. And so that, along with just the nature of being outside of a metropolitan place, that there's an advantage wired into the way the state works electorally for Cruz. And that certainly hasn't changed. But I think that there's certainly been maybe a momentum shift, but I'm the last person to really know about that. I'm just like trying to make a movie.
And again, political advisor Mark McKinnon, in your documentary, he predicted that Cruz would unload on Beto O'Rourke, and we've seen that happen now in the past week or so with a social media campaign against Beto O'Rourke that seems to have been backfired on Ted Cruz. I mean, they painted Beto O'Rourke in a very negative light. They sort of looked at his past history as playing in a band, and they've looked at his DWI charges. How can Ted Cruz kind of recover from this campaign that has backfired on him?
Well, again, I really don't have any idea, but it was interesting in doing the research for the film and then meeting those guys and talking with people, because the thing that's true is that all these issues are old. Like they date back to when Beto was in the city council, and then his run for the House of Representatives. So this is not new material, and so we'll just see how it plays out. It's who knows.
Ted Cruz, of course, won his election and then ended up becoming a presidential candidate. Do you see the same thing happening for Beto O'Rourke if he wins in November? Do you see him perhaps at some point running for president sooner than later?
Yeah, I just don't know. I think he's that talented, that's for sure. And he seems to be popular all over the country. People have found out about him. So you can never... and it's like we were talking about earlier, there are not that many people out there who are good at that. You know, people look at it and go like, wow, this is something. So, but I can't prognosticate about that.
So, Steve, where will you be on Election Day?
I hope I'm going to be at home, although I might wind up filming then, and I haven't really figured that out.
Well, Steve, with Run Like the Devil showing here in Austin, and it's going to have other screenings throughout Texas, what are you planning on doing next?
I'm just kind of busy right now with this. As you mentioned, this film, it shows in Austin this weekend, and then the next week it shows in Nacogdoches on Sunday. It shows in Tyler on Monday. Then it goes on to El Paso, to Lubbock, to Dallas-Fort Worth, to Wichita Falls, to McAllen. And we have a lot of screens. If people want to know more, would you like me to tell you if you go to runlikethedevil2018.com, that's where all our propaganda is, including, it's the best kind of propaganda, and including all these dates. People can even make their own dates. We have an arrangement through TUGG, T-U-G-G, and it's an on-demand theatrical service. And you can find out about all that.
Well, Steve, thank you very much for joining me today on Lights, Camera, Austin to discuss your documentary, Run Like the Devil. Good luck with the screenings here in Austin and outside of Austin.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.